Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff, and I'm PM here at Microsoft at M365 Security and Compliance, and I work on attack simulation training. So today, I'm going to go over our end user experience when you go through a phish simulation, as well as what's the admin workflow for creating that simulation. So a good phish training program can reduce phish susceptibility by 40%. But what does a good phish training program mean? It's not just the content. So the New York University had actually gone through a study called Measuring the Effectiveness of Embedded Phishing Exercises. Basically, what this study discovered was that for a phish training program where you have a phish simulation and then a training associated with that, essentially, the more persuasive the phish simulation payload was, the more effective the training was. And the reason for this is pretty simple. Basically, as an end user, after you've actually fallen for a phish simulation, you've clicked on the phish link, what have you, you actually then recognize that you are personally affected, you're personally invested, you are someone who can actually fall for phish attack. As a result, right afterwards, you create an opportunity for a learning moment. And essentially, within that learning moment, any training that you kind of feed to the user becomes better retained, and users also understand them better. So I'll kind of go over what the phish simulation experience is like for an end user on the attack simulation training platform. So put yourselves in the shoes of a user in your organization. So you can kind of imagine you're kind of perusing your mails one day and you're looking, hey, looks like there's a new mail. You can take a look at this mail. This mail is telling you that a bunch of the emails that's sent to you is actually not being delivered to your inbox. So you, as an end user, you might just be kind of enticed to click on this link. Obviously, maybe you're not looking at the URL, you're not looking at the spelling errors, but you're just kind of like, hey, I want to figure out what these two messages are that I don't see. So let's go ahead and click this link. So basically here it's saying, hey, if you want to go see those mails, you have to enter your credentials. So, as someone who's clicked on email, I'm going to go ahead and enter. I'm going to enter my password. There's actually some things you should notice about this site as an end user. You should notice, hey, portal.hr support in .NET doesn't seem like the Microsoft portal. So there's actually some clues here for an end user, even if they click on the link and go to the site, to kind of back out and say, hey, I don't want to necessarily give them the credentials. But in this case, let's say the user didn't know and just kind of gave up everything. So at this point, the end user has actually entered their credentials, and that means that they've kind of fallen for the attack hook, line, and sinker. So as the service kind of discloses to me, hey, Jeff, you were just phished. We've see basically a very kind of gentle message here that kind of lets me know I've been phished, but also hey, this is not to blame me or whatever. I don't feel blame for this, but rather this is an opportunity and a learning moment for you to kind of improve and understand the phish mail better and be able to detect it next time. So right below this message, this kind of soft message, we see here the phish payload, and this is essentially the mail that just phished me, right? So there's the mail about the two new messages that I couldn't see. In the future, we will actually show indicators on this page as well. And essentially what that would mean is that we would talk about, hey, these are the things that an end user should recognize about this mail to know that it's phished. We will call out things like, hey, this sender address doesn't seem quite legitimate, or, potentially hey, if you look at this link, it's not quite right, or look at this grammar or spelling error, for example. At this point, I've kind of figured out, yes, I've been phished. I've looked at the message that phished me. I've drawn that connection. And I'm going to say, okay, so I understand I'm phished. I'm going to go ahead and go to the training. So this is the training page. So usually for an account, we will detect, hey, your account is your account locale is English. So then we'll pull up the English training. In this specific example, I actually chose a language that was not supported. Just so I can show you this experience. And essentially what you can do here is if the language that you've set your account to isn't supported by any of the trainings, then you can go pick a training language yourself. And essentially you can go and pick whatever language that's closest or something that you recognize that you can then do the training in if we don't have it available already. So all the trainings are offered in these 11 languages for every single user. And generally, if you have any of these languages selected as your kind of preferred language, it will just automatically pull that up for you. But in this case, we have to select ourselves. So let's just go ahead and select English. Okay. So now the training has started. So basically on the first page here, there's an option to basically view the rest of the training in an accessible version. So this is a version of the training that conforms to all the WCAG 2.0 requirements for users that require that accessibility. So if you click on this, then your training should show up with all those accessibility features active. Otherwise, you can unclick this and just kind of proceed with the standard training.
Ah, an email from my bank. Urgent. Password reset required. What? My password has been compromised, and they're requesting that I change it immediately or I could lose access to my account. There's a link. I hope I'm not too late. Enter your old password. Choose a new password. Password change successful. Done. Good thing my bank warned me before anything bad happened.
Would you have changed your password as requested? Introduction. Phishing is a...
So as you can see, that actually just covered a very similar scenario to exactly the phish simulation that we just went through. And essentially, now the training kind of walks us through an introduction and it's all narrated. You can essentially click on all these different icons and learn more about phishing. This is basically a training that kind of walks through all the indicators of the phish. So you can click on these and understand what are the different indicators of a phish message. And again, this can teach you all the best practices of recognizing a message as phish. So this is an interesting exercise. This is basically to help end users spot phish messages. So we have a bunch of sample phish messages, and we're just basically like playing them back to the user and asking them to identify which ones are the phishing mails. So for example, you can kind of go through this. And then lastly, before the end of every training, we have an exercise. Essentially here, end users are evaluated and make sure that they understand the concept, and we're kind of keeping the score. Okay, so I did pretty well in the exercise. I got 80%. But essentially here is kind of the end of the training. So you can go ahead and press the close button and quit the training. And that's kind of the end-to-end training experience. One thing you might also want to notice is what would happen if, let's say, on that training, on that initial page that came up, I just closed it right away and I didn't access this training. The good thing is we actually send an email to that user to kind of give them continued access to training. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. So this is the training assignment email. Basically, this was the training that was just assigned, saying, hey, you have a training course that you need to complete. So I can kind of click this button, go to the training, but also there's an option that we also send kind of a calendar invite, and this is just for users to be able to kind of reserve some time in the future to take the training if they're not able to take it right now. So let's go ahead and take a look at click this button and go to training. Basically, what that takes me to is all the trainings that I've been assigned as a user. It basically has them all in a list, and essentially I can go ahead and complete any of these. So essentially, like from this email, you'll be able to go ahead and look at the full list of trainings that you need to complete. So just in case you kind of close the window in the middle of a training, or if you've kind of like didn't go through the full phish kind of experience, you can still kind of access your trainings here. And especially later when when the user actually hasn't fallen for the phish, or a user hasn't completely been compromised, they've been halfway kind of into the phish attack. This is where all the training that they can access. Cool. So that's kind of the end user flow. We'll kind of go through what the admin flow looks like. So let's go ahead and go into Taximeter admin flow. So this first is the page just showing all the simulations, but you obviously in this circumstance you want to create a brand new simulation, you want to launch simulation. On this page, we basically first is an opportunity to choose the technique. So for phish messages, actually many different flavors. Here we have 4 of them, but we're actually introducing more and more techniques. But for these 4 techniques, you can understand what each of them mean when you view details, and you can understand how the technique works in the short description, as well as go into the MITRE page to look at that technique, look up that technique on MITRE. So let's go with a basic one, the credential harvest technique. Here you kind of like name your campaign, add a description. So I can call this test campaign. Description as well. Cool. So this is the page where you go ahead and select your payload. On this page, you essentially have a list of payloads that you can choose from that you have previously created. If you want to go ahead and create a payload now, you can also click create a payload and kind of go through that flow to create your custom payload. But this will always be populated because there will at the very least will be some like Microsoft created payloads, and we'll kind of go over that. So you can filter all the payloads that you want to pick from in 2 categories: complexity and source. So complexity, what that means is how many indicators are in that phish payload. Like how many different ways can an end user use to identify that that mail is a phish mail. So for high complexity mails, that means that for that phish payload, there's actually lots of indicators, lots of clues for the end user to spot that mail is a phish. So you can choose something like high complexity if you're trying to just like your first kind of simulation or something for your users, so they can kind of have an easy one to identify. For source, there's global and tenant payloads. And basically, a global payload is a set of payloads that Microsoft employees have hand curated out of all the phish mails that we capture across the entire service, and we basically we'll pick out things that are popular during this month, for example, or hey, like this is one that's gone out to a lot of users, or this is like kind of relevant to some kind of worldly event right now, and we'll kind of hand curate that and add that, make that available to the customers. You can also select a tenant, which will just be the payloads that you've kind of created, or the payloads that you have just within your tenant, and you can kind of filter by those too. Of course, you can also search by your payloads as well. Let's go ahead and look at a specific payload. Okay. So this will show a preview of the payload that you selected. Essentially here you can kind of take a look. This is the payload we just sent out a little while ago, and it'll kind of explain like who would it show up as a sender and subject and that sort of stuff. You can also see if this payload was used recently in any other simulations. So you can kind of look at that as well. One other thing that we see on this page is this predicted compromise rate. So this is basically data sourced from across the service on like how often users have fallen for this specific payload. It's particularly for like global payloads are hand curated. We can kind of dig into our ATP data and figure out how many users on average file for it. And essentially, it's something to kind of benchmark and compare yourself against when you're looking at the simulation results. Go to the next page here. So now you can go ahead and select the users who you want to add to this campaign. You can upload this via CSV file, so you can kind of select something here. Or, of course, you can just add users directly. So you can search, and this will kind of look through your tenants and find those users for you. So I'm going to send this simulation just to myself. Okay, and you can keep going. Right. So on this page, now there is the assigned training experience. So this is where you kind of actually choose the training content. So there's many different types of training experiences that we can eventually have. Right now, it just shows a Microsoft training experience, but there will also be an experience where you don't have any training content, and also an experience if you want to have your own custom content that will be made available here soon. And then you have the option of either going with the default trainings that Microsoft has kind of chosen for you, or you can select the training courses and modules yourself. You can go ahead and choose that and select them manually. And then you can also choose a training due date, so that when do you want these trainings to be due? What's the target date for the users to complete the training? Okay, let's go to the next page. So here you can kind of add trainings. So if you click the add trainings button, you'll see two kind of collections of trainings. There's a recommended, so this will be training based on kind of the technique that you're using. These are the trainings that are relevant. But of course, you can kind of go to all trainings and kind of look through the whole catalog and pick a specific training if you're so inclined. I'm going to go ahead and pick these two trainings, add them to this campaign. Now what you can do here is actually choose when are each of these specific training modules going to be assigned. So this can depend on basically what kind of outcome the user has in that campaign. So for some trainings, you might just say, hey, you know what, since everyone, this is a good generic training just because they were in this campaign. But you can also say, you know, for users who have actually fallen for the campaign, I want to assign them something specific. So this will be for any users who've actually given up their credentials and kind of fallen hook, line, and sinker. You want to offer them the phishing module. Let's go to the next page. So this is a training landing page. I'll kind of preview this page just to kind of rock your memory again. So this is a page that we landed right after the user has realized that they've been more or less fully compromised, and then there's a statement here, a soft statement to kind of let them know that they've been compromised, and like, hey, you know, like there's obviously room for improvement for the phish mail. You can actually customize those text here for the header and body, so you can put in like organization-specific text if you'd like. And then lastly here is when you actually launch the simulation. So you can choose either to launch the simulation right now, like when we've created it, or we can schedule this simulation for shortly in the future. And essentially here, you can pick a date, launch time, etc., and say, hey, I want to launch a simulation in the future. And also you select the date when to end the simulation. So this basically, when the simulation ends is when we stopped taking into account any of the any more clicks from the user. So if at this point the user is still continuing to interact with the phish mail, we won't record those actions anymore. And then also this affects when the training is assigned. And in the future, we will actually have a control here that allows, at the end of a simulation, we will have essentially a service to kind of go through your tenant and remove all the phish payload mails from like the individual user mailboxes. You also have an option here to enable region-aware time zone delivery. And what this does is this looks at for each of your users, looks at their calendar, and based on kind of where they've set their available times are, it will send these phishing mails when they're actually available and online. So it will say like, hey, you know, it looks like your working hours are between 9 and 5, you know, PST. That's when we'll kind of engage and send out the phish mail. So this kind of enables that delivery. Lastly, before you kind of send the simulation, you can go ahead and review all the settings, take a look at it, and then you can go ahead and submit it. So this is kind of completed. The simulation is sent out. You should be able to see it on this list. Okay. So now you can see the simulation that you've just launched, and it's in progress right now. So this is basically the entire demo. So you've seen kind of the experience on what the end user experience looks like, as well as the experience to actually build a campaign and send it out. So thank you for kind of for watching this video, and I'm looking forward to you sending out your first simulation.